Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another daily devotional. We're thinking about the subject of prayer and specifically when we should pray. We've already seen that it's good to establish the pattern of praying to God in the morning, praying to God in the evening before we lie down to bed, and also praying to God during the day. The psalmist speaks about praying morning, noon, and evening. And that was probably the pattern that Daniel established. We know that he prayed 3 times a day. We've also seen that it's good to pray to God whenever we're facing specific challenges or hardships or decisions that we have to make throughout the day, that it's good to turn to God with a short turning of the heart and mind and seeking God's help and grace in that specific situation. Are there other times that we should pray to God? I would suggest there are. For example, we should turn to God in prayer as soon as we recognize that we have committed sin. This was David's mistake. David committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had her husband Uriah murdered. And for over a year, David wouldn't face up to the fact that he'd committed that sin. And for that year, David's life was miserable. It was only whenever Nathan came and challenged David and really brought his sin out into the open that David then turned to God and sought forgiveness. And that's when he wrote Psalm 51. Whenever we are aware of the fact that we've sinned against God, we should go to God there and then. We should turn to him and ask for forgiveness. But not only that, we should also turn to God and pray to God, speak to God at those times when we are feeling particularly blessed. You remember the psalmist in Psalm 103, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, everything that is within me, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." That's a wonderful prayer to speak to God whenever we are feeling particularly blessed. And we've all had those experiences when you're just feeling so blessed in your heart and in your soul. Turn to God and use those very words of Psalm 103. Your prayer doesn't have to be long. How long does it take you to say in your heart to God, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me," and so on? A few moments, but it is a prayer to God. And also, it's good to turn to God in prayer whenever we feel particularly moved by the Spirit to do so. And you'll find there are occasions when it just seems as though the Spirit of God is prompting you to turn to God in prayer. Maybe someone tells you about a friend who has cancer. Maybe someone tells you about a situation where marriage is in trouble, or a situation where there's outreach being done, and you feel, "I should pray about that." Well, do pray about it. And as I say, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to spend half an hour in prayer, but turn your thoughts and your desires to God and speak to God for whatever length of time is appropriate. There's one other indication in Scripture with regards to when we should pray. And that is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. There the Apostle Paul says to believers, "Pray continually." Pray continually. I think the King James has "pray without ceasing." And you might wonder, well, how could we ever do that? Pray without ceasing. It's as though we're being asked to pray every minute of the day, 24 hours a day. That's not what Paul is speaking about here. What he's really getting at is that we should be people who are so attuned to God that every part of the day we are walking and living in God's presence, continually turning our thoughts and mind to him and always ready to speak to him. To pray continually or to pray without ceasing is to be in an attitude of openness to speak to God and to communicate with God. It's a wonderful thing to do what some of the old preachers and teachers used to do, called practicing the presence of God. In other words, no matter what you're doing, being aware of God's presence. And when we nurture that attitude, it's very easy then just to turn to God and speak to him. You're driving your car, or you're sitting reading a book or whatever, and God is there with you. And how simple it is then simply to communicate with God. That's what it is to pray continually or without ceasing. To be in an attitude of prayer communication with God. So these are times then that we should pray to God regularly, morning, noon and evening, whenever we're faced with particular issues that come up during the day, whenever we sin, whenever we feel particularly blessed, whenever we're moved by the Spirit. And we should be in an attitude where we are aware of God's presence with us, no matter what we're doing, no matter who we're with, and always ready to communicate with God, even if it isn't verbally, to communicate inside, speaking to God in our hearts. I trust that these thoughts will help you in your prayer life. Every blessing.